When a person goes missing, there are usually some clues left behind to help investigators piece together what happened. Sometimes these clues lead to the person being returned home safe and well. But what happens when there are no clues and someone vanishes without a trace? 18-year-old Michael Negretti had recently enrolled at UCLA with the music scholarship in the autumn of 1999. By all accounts, he was an intelligent and well-liked young man with a promising future ahead of him. He was gearing up to take his exams in December of that year, knowing that once exam season was over, he would be able to relax with his family and friends before returning to college in the new year. Sadly, Michael would never get to sit his exams, and on the morning of December 10th, 1999, he disappeared without a trace. Michael lived on the 6th floor of the Dykstra Hall, which was on the UCLA campus, and shared his room with one other person. On the evening of December 9th, 1999, Michael partied before going back to his room to play video games with someone else at the university. As this was 1999, Michael had to play the game over the university's wireless LAN network. Michael continued gaming and furiously mashing buttons well into the night before deciding to call it a day at around 4 a.m. According to reports, Michael left his dorm room to go and congratulate his opponent before returning to his room for a final time at 4:30 a.m. After this, Michael has never been seen or heard from again. When Michael's roommate awoke at 9 a.m. the next morning, Michael was nowhere to be seen. After searching around the dorm for him, he realized that Michael wasn't in the building. His roommate noted that his clothes, keys, shoes, wallet, and his instrument had all been left behind too. Michael's absence was quickly noted, and his family were informed, who in turn reported him missing. A wide-scale search of the UCLA dorms was conducted, but there was no sign of Michael. During the investigation, witnesses came forward and reported seeing a strange man in his 30s with a stocky build walking around Dykstra Hall around the time that Michael was last seen. Despite a sketch being circulated and numerous appeals, this unidentified man never came forward, and it's not clear what his connection is to Michael's case. For years, Michael's case has remained dormant, and in the absence of evidence, we're left to theorize. In the days after Michael went missing, sniffer dogs were able to track his scent to Sunset Boulevard and Bellagio Street, but nothing else ever came of this. In 2013, Michael's brother, Steve, stated that Michael had been experimenting with substances in the weeks prior to his disappearance, and that he believes Michael left his dorm under the influence of something and crossed paths with the wrong person. Other theories suggest that Michael left his dorm and fell into a construction area, as the dorms in UCLA were undergoing major constructive work at the time. The police consider Michael's disappearance a homicide, and his family continued to work with police and private investigators to find out what happened to Michael and why he disappeared without a trace. Anyone with information is asked to contact the UCLA Police Department at 310-825-1491 or the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department at 323-890-5500. Edward and Stefania Andrews were a popular couple within the community of Arlington Heights, Illinois. Arlington Heights is a wealthy suburb of Illinois, and in the 1970s, it was home to well-to-do socialites and successful businessmen. Edward and Stefania were two such people, making a name for themselves within socialite circles and their careers. Edward worked as a bookkeeper and manager for a manufacturing firm based in Chicago, while Stefania worked as a credit investigator. Stefania was also a member of the Women's Auxiliary Beverage Institute, and on May 15, 1970, the pair attended a cocktail party hosted by the Women's Institute at the Sheraton Hotel in Chicago. Upon their arrival at 5:30 p.m., the couple seemed to be happy and ready to party the night away. However, this good mood quickly diminished. According to other partygoers, Edward looked ill and complained that he was hungry, and began behaving strangely, staggering from side to side. By 9:30 p.m., the Andrews decided to call it a night, heading back to their 1969 Oldsmobile that had been parked in the hotel's parking garage. This is where Edward's and Stefania's behavior took a dramatic shift. Edward began stumbling to his car, which alarmed the valet, who thought he might have been under the influence. The valet also saw Stefania crying in the front seat. Before the valet was able to intervene, Edward drove the car out of the parking garage and onto Michigan Avenue. The valet would later tell investigators that Edward had hit the door on the way out and had to reposition the car in order to get out of the door. The valet then watched Edward illegally drive south into the northbound lanes towards Michigan Avenue Bridge and Wacker Drive. While this behavior was concerning, it doesn't appear that the police were called, and the valet and those who witnessed Edward's erratic driving went about their own business. It wasn't until Monday, May 18, 1970, that anybody realized the Andrews were missing. Both Edward and Stefania failed to show up for work, which sent alarm bells ringing for their colleagues. After realizing that something was wrong, the Arlington Heights police were called, and the two 62-year-olds were officially reported missing. In the days after Andrew and Stefania disappeared, the Chicago River was searched extensively after investigators theorized that Edward had driven the car off the road and into the water. This theory was supported by the fact that a bridge on Lower Wacker Drive was covered in scrapes while the road was covered in skid marks. Sadly, despite searching the Chicago River numerous times, no sign of Edward or Stefania has ever been found. Over the years, numerous tips have been called in, but these have amounted to nothing. A shocking new development came 24 years after the couple disappeared in 1994, when an informant told the Arlington Heights Police Department that Edward and Stefania had been placed in a pond near Green Oaks in Lake County, Illinois. The informant told investigators that a group of young men were responsible for what happened to the couple. However, despite extensive searches, no sign of Edward or Stefania has ever been found in Lake County. The community of Arlington Heights were baffled as to how two popular socialites could vanish without a trace, and 52 years later, we're still no closer to solving the mystery. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Arlington Heights Police Department at 847-368-5300. 18-year-old Tammy Lynn Leopard has been missing for almost 39 years as of 2022, and her case is among some of the most mysterious disappearances that cannot be explained. In 1983, Tammy Lynn Leopard was an up-and-coming actress living in Rockledge, Florida, with her family, and her future looked bright. In 1982, she landed a role in the film Spring Break, which brought in over $25 million at the box office. This role changed Tammy's life. She'd been a successful beauty queen throughout her childhood, and now she was headed for stardom. However, an out-of-town party would change all of that. After Spring Break was successful, Tammy went to an out-of-town party without the accompaniment of any adults, according to her mother, Linda Curtis. Tammy came back from the party a drastically different woman. She became very paranoid, evading phone calls and looking at everyone she passed with suspicion. Linda was, of course, concerned for her daughter and asked what was wrong. Tammy tried her hardest to avoid answering the question before settling on the answer of, quote, "I saw something awful, something really bad that I was not supposed to see. Mom, what would you say if I told you someone was trying to harm me?" Linda kept pushing the matter, but each time Tammy shut down. She would only say that, quote, "they were after her," but again refused to elaborate as to who they were. As the weeks passed, Tammy's behavior became more erratic, but when she received a small part in the film Scarface, her family and friends hoped that a new project would allow her to shift her focus and bring her back to reality. Unfortunately, the filming of Scarface did the exact opposite, and just 4 days into filming in March of 1983, Tammy freaked out during the filming of a particularly graphic scene. As a result of her breakdown, the director sent Tammy home, and Linda, her mother, assumed the care of her once more. Her behavior only began to escalate again, and according to Unsolved Mysteries, Tammy would only eat food from other people's plates and refused drinks if they were in open containers, fearing that someone was trying to poison her. This behavior continued before Tammy eventually erupted, which saw her admitted to the Brevard County Mental Health Center in early July of 1983. Linda and Tammy's friends were extremely concerned for her welfare and did everything they could to get her the help that she needed. Linda spoke to the doctors at the mental health facility and with the local sheriff's office, but nobody could find any threat to Tammy's life or any psychiatric conditions that may have explained her behavior. During the filming of Scarface, Tammy had rambled to the director about something about money laundering. However, the director wasn't able to make any sense of the conversation due to Tammy's heightened emotional state. By July 6, 1983, Tammy had been released from the mental health facility, and it appeared that things had calmed down. On the morning of July 6th, Tammy and her friend, Keith Roberts, jumped into Keith's car and headed towards the beach. According to Keith, he and Tammy got into an argument on the way to the beach, and Tammy asked to be let out of his car. Keith obliged and apparently let Tammy out on State Road A1A in Cocoa Beach near the Glass Bank building. Bizarrely, Tammy left behind her bag, purse, and identification, something that she would have needed to make the 5-mile journey home. It appears that Keith has never disclosed what the two argued about, or why Tammy was so insistent to get out of the car. After getting out of the car, Tammy Lynn Leopard has never been seen or heard from again, and her disappearance continues to haunt investigators. In the absence of any evidence, theories have sprung up over the years, and the most prevailing theory is that Tammy saw something she shouldn't have while she was out at the party. Her mother, Linda, believes that Tammy has either met with foul play or suffered from amnesia and is living a new life somewhere else. According to the Cocoa Beach Police Department, they received 2 calls in the years following Tammy's disappearance by a woman claiming to be Tammy, who told them she had run away and started a new life as a nurse. This is a claim that was heavily refuted by all of those who knew Tammy, as Tammy was extremely squeamish. Apparently, Linda Curtis passed away in 1995 without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Tammy's siblings and friends now continue the fight for answers and justice. Tammy's case has been linked to serial killers, organized crime, and possibly the idea that she ran away voluntarily. However, until new evidence comes to light, it's likely that we will never know. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Cocoa Beach Police Department at 407-868-3269 or 321-868-3251. In the years since his mysterious disappearance, Lars Matan has taken on the name of the most famous missing tourist in the world. The CCTV footage in the moments leading up to his disappearance has garnered millions of views, and 8 years later, we're still discussing his case. In June of 2014, 28-year-old Lars Matan of Berlin, Germany, along with a group of friends, made the journey to Varna, Bulgaria for a vacation. On June 30th, Lars and his friends were drinking at a bar when Lars got into what is described as an altercation with a group of Bayern Munich fans. Lars was a Werder Bremen fan, and tensions soon flared between the two groups. After the tension fizzled out, the group left the bar. However, Lars mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't until the next morning, when he returned to the hotel, that the full story of what happened came out. Lars told them that he'd been beaten up by 4 men, the same men he had argued with in the bar the night before, but then later changed his story, saying that it was just one man who was local. There were several different accounts of what happened to Lars. Some say he was beaten while inside the bar, while his friends maintained that he disappeared after leaving the bar, but also state that he gave differing stories of what happened. Despite not knowing for sure who was responsible, his friends knew one thing, and that was that Lars was in a bad state. They went with him to a local doctor, who confirmed that he suffered a ruptured eardrum, as well as an injury to his jaw. Lars was given antibiotics and told not to fly until he had healed. His friends offered to defer their flights and stay with Lars until he was cleared to fly, but Lars declined their offers. His friends boarded their plane home to Germany, not knowing it would be the last time they ever saw him. On July 8, 2014, Lars Matan entered Varna Airport in preparation for his return flight to Germany. In the days leading up to his flight, his mother reported that Lars had been acting strangely, calling her in a hushed whisper, telling her that people were after him. Hotel CCTV also confirmed that Lars had been acting bizarrely, showing him hiding inside the elevators and being paranoid of everyone around him. This bizarre behavior came to a head on July 8, 2014, and the events that transpired cemented Lars's case as one of the most mysterious disappearances in history. Shortly before going through security and passport checks, Lars went to see the airport doctor, who cleared him to fly. However, during the consultation, a construction worker entered the office as construction work was taking place in the airport. This freaked Lars out so much that he dropped all of his things, ran out of the doctor's office, through the hallway, and out of the airport. The entire event was captured on CCTV, and a bewildered Lars can be seen sprinting, almost for his life, through the airport's hallways. After this, he climbs over a fence and runs into the forest, never to be seen again. Investigators were called to Varna Airport, and in the years that have passed, there have been numerous investigations and searches, but there's been no sign of Lars. Dr. Todd Grande suggested that Lars may have experienced something called first break psychosis, which would explain his bizarre behavior and paranoia. Others believe that the men from the bar are involved, and that they hold the key to finding the world's most famous missing tourist. Anyone with information is urged to contact the Varna police at 359-52-355-311 or the BKA at 490-611-550. 18-year-old Russell Bowling of West Ella, Yorkshire, had his whole life ahead of him and was looking forward to what the future would bring. During his school years, Russell had suffered from communication issues, but after finishing secondary school, he enrolled in a bricklaying course at Bishop Burton College where he was doing well. On the morning of March 2nd, 2010, Russell left his home in West Ella, got into his car, and began the 10-mile drive to college. At least that's where his parents believed he was headed. In reality, Russell was headed for Bempton Cliffs, 45 miles away from his home in West Ella, and in the opposite direction of his college. As far as his parents were concerned, Russell had left for another day at college and would be back home in time for tea. But as darkness fell and there was no sign of Russell, they began to worry. Fearing the worst, his parents called the police and reported their son missing. Meanwhile, at Bempton Cliffs, an RSPB employee noticed Russell's car in a car park close to the cliffs. The car had a parking ticket displayed, and the RSPB employee went about their day. It wasn't until the next morning, when the RSPB employee saw Russell's car again, that the alarm was raised. The ticket had since expired, and the employee called the owners of the car park to report what they had found. When the police learned about Russell's car being found at Bempton Cliffs, they rushed to the scene, hoping they could find clues pertaining to Russell's whereabouts. But they were unable to uncover anything. The Humberside Fire and Rescue Service were also called out to the scene to perform an extensive search of the cliff sides and surrounding areas using thermal imaging cameras, but they too failed to turn up any evidence. In the days after Russell's disappearance, the police released new information about Russell's last movements. It was revealed that just 30 minutes before he set off from his home in West Ella on March 2nd, 2010, he'd visited the RAF Bempton website. This is significant as Bempton Cliffs is home to a disused RAF radar station that was taken over by a bizarre cult in the 1970s. According to Russell's father, Russell had become fixated with the group and had even kept a USB of the cult's art that they'd scrawled across the walls of the radar station. After this upsurge in activity, the radar station was a hotspot for urban explorers, which led to the radar station being sealed. But that didn't stop people from trying to get a peek inside. It's theorized that this USB stick may have had something to do with Russell's disappearance, as it's never been found. Did Russell uncover something that he shouldn't have, or did he go exploring in the wrong location? The police also searched Russell's sat-nav and found that in the days leading up to his disappearance, he had visited places across North Yorkshire, and that these towns or cities may hold some significance to his disappearance. His parents also retraced his steps to Bimpton Cliffs, and found that it would have been impossible for him to drive from West Ella to Bimpton Cliffs without stopping for gas. According to reports, there was no activity on his card on the morning that he went missing, and he had little to no cash on him. So how did his car make it all the way there without any money for gas? Since his mysterious disappearance, Russell's parents have fought tirelessly for answers, and despite numerous media appeals, they're still no closer to finding the truth. At the start of the investigation, it was theorized that Russell may have taken his own life. However, there's been no evidence to support this. In 2019, Assistant Coroner David Rosenberg addressed the coroner's court in Hull, telling Russell's family, quote, "Based on the submissions of the police that no body has been found, I believe somehow he passed at sea at Bimpton Cliffs." David Rosenberg did, however, rule out the possibility that Russell took his own life, and as of 2022, the case remains largely unsolved. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Humberside Police at 01482 220 393 or Crime Stoppers at 0800 555 111. When someone goes missing in an urban environment, there's a very likely chance that they were captured on CCTV cameras in the moments before they vanished, which gives investigators a good starting point from where they can begin their search. But when someone disappears while out in the wild, they need to rely on eyewitness accounts and the missing person's itinerary, but these aren't always available, making their task much more complicated. In October of 1996, 37-year-old Michael Jose Malanowski was living in Yardley, Pennsylvania in an apartment that he shared with a man named Greg Rossi. He was divorced from his wife and was working as a mental health counselor at the Greater Trenton Community Mental Health Center. John's son, who was 10 years old at the time, was living with his ex-wife in Washington State, and Michael had on several occasions stated that he would like to move closer so that he could spend more time with him. He was known to enjoy spending time in the outdoors and often rented a cabin at Pine Lake Lookout, which at the time was called Pine Tree Lodge. This would be the last place that he was ever seen before he mysteriously disappeared. On the 24th of October of that year, Michael decided to travel to the lodge again after he had completed a psychology seminar in Chester County. He was unable to drive there in his own car since it wasn't in the best condition, and so he rented a Nissan Sentra instead. He planned on spending 2 nights at the lodge and arrived there at about 4:30 p.m. After completely checking in, he phoned his roommate back home and informed him that he had arrived safely. But 4 days later, the manager of the lodge decided to report Michael as missing, since he was supposed to have checked out 2 days earlier. He waited an extra 2 days since Michael was a regular at the lodge, and he assumed that he was just enjoying his time in the wilderness, since he stated that he was planning on taking photos of the surrounding area. Investigators traveled to Michael's cabin and immediately conducted a search. Inside, they found his coat still hanging on the back of a chair. All of his belongings were still where he had left them, and a pair of his shoes were still under his bed. They knew he hadn't left the area since his rental car was still parked at the lodge, and when it was searched, they found a water bottle, some healthy snacks, his coat, which was draped over the passenger seat, and his cell phone. It seemed as though he had carried through with his plans, since his camera's case was also found in the vehicle, but the camera was nowhere to be seen. A search of the area was quickly organized, and for the next 5 days, a team of more than 100 firefighters was aided by search dogs, rappelling experts, and helicopters that searched from the sky, but no sign of Michael could be found. The general consensus was that Michael had taken a few bottles of water before setting out into the wilderness, but no one could understand why he hadn't returned, as he was very familiar with that particular area, and it seemed unlikely he would have gotten lost. But the area is known to have some very steep cliffs, some of which have no railing to keep hikers from falling over, and people started to speculate that Michael may have misstepped and either fell or injured himself badly enough that he couldn't continue walking. But there have been other theories in regards to his disappearance. Some people think he may have fallen victim to foul play and that he had his life ended by another hiker. Others think he may have been accidentally shot by a hunter in the area, but this is unlikely since the only game in season at the time was squirrels and grouse. There's also the theory that he walked into the wilderness to end his own life, but this is even more likely since he loved spending time with his son and even thought about moving to Washington State to be closer to him. No sign of Michael was ever found, and the investigation into his mysterious disappearance has never been solved. Michael had brown hair and brown eyes. He stands at around 5 foot 9 inches tall, and at the time he went missing, weighed 140 pounds. Anyone who spots Michael or knows anything about his disappearance can contact the Pennsylvania State Police at 570-662-2151. In some missing person cases, investigators believe that foul play is involved, and they then have to identify a suspect that had a motive to do harm to the missing person. But proving that they had anything to do with their disappearance is another matter, and in some instances this simply can't be done. This is seemingly what happened in the missing person case involving 30-year-old Cindy Marie Leco, who disappeared from St. Clair Shores in Michigan in October of 1994. At the time, Cindy was studying at Macomb Community College, as she was planning on pursuing a career in nursing, and she was married to a man named Abritt Leco. But the relationship between her and Abritt was extremely strained, as she'd filed for divorce following 2 abusive incidents that occurred in 1989 and 1992 respectively. She also contacted the police to report that Abritt was keeping illegal substances in their house, and when the home was searched, they found 6 pounds of the substance, which was then confiscated. During the divorce proceedings, Cindy was awarded temporary custody of the couple's 2 children, and she was told that she could keep the house that they were living in, which didn't sit well with Abritt. On the day of her disappearance, Cindy was studying for a test when she received a call from one of her friends, a woman named Suzanne Werfel. During their conversation, Cindy stated that she was becoming worried about her children, who were spending the weekend with Abritt since he hadn't brought them home in time. But the call soon ended when she told Suzanne that she could hear a car pulling into her driveway, and she assumed that it was Abritt bringing the kids back. But no one knows whether this was really the case, since she's never been seen or heard from since. Cindy was supposed to attend class at college the next day, but when she didn't show up, Suzanne started to worry, and she contacted the police. A missing person report was opened, and the investigation into Cindy's disappearance was underway. An eyewitness came forward to report that they'd seen the couple arguing in front of the house that night, and that Cindy had cried out for help at some point, but no one called the police, and it isn't known what happened after that. Police divers were brought in to search rivers and lakes in the area, and search teams started digging up septic tanks, making it clear that investigators suspected foul play from the onset of the investigation. 3 days after she went missing, Cindy's car was found about 15 miles from her house, and inside, investigators found her purse, but her firearm and wallet were nowhere to be seen. When Abritt was questioned, he stated that he was the one who left her car where it was found, and that he had done so to spite Cindy. When the date for the couple's divorce settlement hearing arrived, Cindy still remained missing, and Abritt was awarded custody of the children, and was told that he could have the family's house back. The investigation into Cindy's disappearance stalled in 2001, when Abritt was arrested on suspicion that he had ended her life. It was suggested that Abritt disposed of his wife's remains somewhere along the I-75 highway, and one of Albert's friends, Jeffrey, testified that Abritt had asked him whether he knew someone who would take his wife's life. It also came to light during the trial that an anonymous caller had contacted the police to report that he had seen Cindy at Harper and Shady Lane, where she was sitting in a car in front of a 7-Eleven store. But this caller was never identified, and it's been speculated that they made the call on Abritt's instruction to provide him with an alibi. When the trial finally came to a close, Abritt was acquitted of all charges. It was ruled that since Cindy's remains were never found, there was no way of proving that she didn't disappear voluntarily, and so it couldn't be proven that Abritt had harmed her in any way. Though most people believe that Abritt was indeed responsible for her disappearance, no further evidence has been found, and Cindy's case remains unsolved. Abritt still maintains that he's innocent, and that he has no idea what happened to Cindy that night. He still lives in St. Clair Shores today. It's always cause for alarm when it comes to light that a missing person was struggling with their mental health in the days leading up to their disappearance, since this could bring a number of factors into play, including the possibility that they may have taken their own life. But this is impossible to prove if they're never tracked down, and many people theorize that this is what happened to 23-year-old David Scott Abramovitz, who mysteriously vanished on the 3rd of May 2001. David was known by his friends and family as a compassionate man who enjoyed writing, painting, playing the piano, and who often worked with seeing eye dogs. But in the weeks before he vanished without a trace, he had been struggling emotionally as he was suffering from depression. David's sisters, Jill Abramovitz and Stephanie Fletcher, have stated that when he got depressed, he liked to escape into nature, as he enjoyed being in the outdoors between the wild animals that could be found in the area. The last time that anyone saw David was at his family's house in Morristown, New Jersey, close to the Randolph border. After he was reported missing, investigators tracked his cell phone, and it was found to last be active in Burlington, Vermont, but it isn't known what happened to him after that. What struck investigators as strange was the fact that David completely emptied out his bank account in the days before he disappeared. He also gave many of his personal belongings away, and one of his friends would come forward following his disappearance to report that he'd received a note from David in which he'd stated that he would be going away. Many people believe that this hinted at the possibility that he was planning to end his own life, but his sisters disagree, as they've consulted with an expert on the matter who believes the note is far less sinister, rather suggesting that he was planning on going away on his own for a while, or possibly even forever. Stephanie told investigators that she had a similar conversation with David while they were celebrating his birthday. When she asked him what his future plans were, he said that he wanted to go on an adventure, during which he would attempt to figure things out. What is known is that David had mentioned Quechee Gorge Village in the past, and it was thought that he may have traveled there to hike the 165-foot-high gorge, since he wanted to be in the wilderness. The Rappel search team traveled up and down the gorge looking for David, but they were unable to find any sign that he'd been there in the days before he vanished. His family also traveled to the area and handed out flyers while conducting their own search, but this was also done in vain, as no one had seen David in the area. David's family remain hopeful that he will be found alive, and they've speculated that he may have relocated to Wyoming or another area in the West in order to start a new life away from the hustle and bustle of his hometown. It's now been 22 years since David was last seen, and he would currently be 45 years old. He's known to sometimes go by his nicknames, which are Dave and Davey. His family describes him as having brown hair and brown eyes, standing 6 foot 1 inches tall, and at the time of his disappearance, weighing 145 pounds. It should be noted that David has a distinctive gap between his front teeth, and he's known to wear a rope choker necklace on occasion. His family remains adamant that David did not end his own life, and they believe he's living elsewhere in the country. They've asked anyone who may have seen him or who knows where he's currently residing to come forward to contact the Morris Township Police Department at 973-539-0777, quoting case number 2001-12097. David's nameless case number is MP604. In November of 2009, 21-year-old Christina Whitaker from Hannibal, Missouri, was excited as she was planning on having a night out with a group of her friends. It had been a long time since she had done so, since she'd recently given birth and hadn't had time for anything besides taking care of her new baby. Christina had arranged for her boyfriend, Travis Blackwell, to take care of her daughter at her mother's house. He was happy to help since Christina's mother, Cindy, was out of town, and he knew that Christina needed some time away. He then gave Christina a ride to Rookie's Sports Bar, where she met up with her friends for a well-deserved night of relaxation. Travis would later tell investigators that he dropped her off between 8:30 and 8:45 p.m. The night wouldn't go to plan, though, as Christina has never been seen or heard from again. When Travis woke up the next morning, he realized that Christina wasn't in the house, and he started to panic, since she wouldn't just stay away without informing him. He then called Cindy and told her that he was unable to get a hold of Christina. Cindy immediately started traveling back home, and Travis arranged for a family member to look after Christina's daughter, since he had to report for a shift at work. That same morning, Christina's cell phone was found outside of an apartment complex near the sports bar by a member of the public, and it was handed in to the police. But when it was searched, nothing of importance was found. During the investigation into Christina's disappearance, Travis stated that he'd received a phone call from her at around 10:30, during which she offered to bring home some food when she returned. She added that she was planning on being home at around midnight and that she would contact him if she couldn't find a ride. But this is where things get a little murky. Some people who were present in the bar that night stated that Christina was asked to leave just before midnight, as she'd become intoxicated and gotten into an argument with another patron. When she was kicked out, her friends decided to stay at the bar, with one of them stating that they didn't want to go to jail because of her. The bartender, a woman who knew Christina, stated that she saw her arguing with someone over the phone and that she was crying uncontrollably before being taken out of the bar via the back door. But a bouncer at the establishment stated that he saw her again enter the bar a short while later in the company of an unknown man. But several other witnesses described seeing her leave with 4 men, while one of her friends claims that she was seen outside the bar sitting in a car with 2 of them. Christina was reported as missing by her mother on Sunday, the 15th of November, but investigators didn't think it was an urgent matter, since they thought she just needed some time to herself. But when she remained missing a few days later, they reassessed the situation, and an investigation was launched. There was no sign of Christina anywhere, but soon speculation began to run rife as to what could have happened to her. Some people believe that Travis had something to do with her disappearance, but Christina's mother strongly disagrees, since he didn't have any motive to harm her. It has been suggested that the relationship between Christina and Travis was an abusive one. Both Travis and the father of Christina's baby, a man named Justin Johnston, were asked to take polygraph tests, which Johnston passed, but Travis failed. This gave rise to further theories that he was involved somehow, but this has never been proven. 2 weeks after Cindy disappeared, someone contacted the police to report that she'd been kidnapped by a group of men who were involved in human trafficking, and that they had relocated her to Peoria, Illinois. This theory was further bolstered by a report from a store clerk in Peoria, who stated that she saw Christina a short while after the investigation started. A waitress from the same area also reported seeing her, and she was convinced that it was indeed Christina that she saw. Then came the most worrying of all the sightings. A woman contacted the police to state that she and Christina had been in the same mental health hospital in Peoria, and that Christina confided in her that she was being trafficked. There's also the possibility that medication that Christina was taking mixed badly with the alcohol that she was drinking that night, and that she accidentally fell into the Mississippi River. Given the cold conditions of that evening, she may have suffered from hypothermia and passed away, but this is mere speculation, as no sign of this was ever found. Christina's family believe that she is still alive somewhere, and they hold out hope that she will be tracked down in the future. If you have any information on what happened to her that night or her current whereabouts, you're asked to contact the Hannibal Police Department at 573-221-0987. A $10,000 reward is offered to anyone who supplies investigators with information leading to Christina's whereabouts. Though her case has now gone cold, it remains open, and investigators continue to look for clues that may reveal what happened that night. In December of 1998, 19-year-old Kimberly Riley was living in Lorain, Ohio, along with her 2 sons. She was in a relationship with the boy's father, 24-year-old Omar Seymour, with whom she had a tumultuous relationship, according to those who knew her. On the 23rd of December of that year, Kimberly and Omar traveled to Omar's mother's house, where they dropped the two boys off at around 2:30 p.m., as Kimberly was planning on doing some last-minute Christmas shopping. Christina's grandmother, Vernice Akerts, stated that she saw Christina for the last time 3 days earlier, and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary when they spoke. But neither Kimberly nor Omar returned from their shopping trip, and Vernice hadn't heard from Kimberly for some time. She contacted Omar's mother, who then gave 3 conflicting statements about the day in question, specifically about the time that they had arrived at her house, but this information has not been made public. Vernice and her husband then collected the children from Omar's mother and took them back to their house. On the 24th of December, Omar's mother contacted Vernice to ask if they'd heard from the couple, and upon being told that they hadn't, she suggested that they decided to run away together but couldn't give a specific reason. Vernice refuted this theory though, since Kimberly was looking forward to spending Christmas with her family, and she believed that if Kimberly had been planning to disappear, she would have taken the children somewhere other than Omar's mother's house. When Kimberly's apartment was searched, investigators determined it was unlikely that they disappeared intentionally, since there were Christmas gifts under the tree, her medication was still there, and her personal effects such as her toothbrush were also still present. Strangely, 2 blankets were found to be missing from the apartment, along with 2 photo albums and a plastic trash bin which was kept in the kitchen. All of Kimberly's belongings were left behind, though Omar's were missing, except for 1 sock that was found. A missing person report was filed on the 27th of December, and on the 31st, Riley's car, an orange 1989 model Mazda, was discovered abandoned in Cleveland. It was impounded and eventually returned to Lorraine, but nothing of interest was ever found, save for the possibility that someone taller than Kimberly had been sitting in the seat. The car wasn't immediately searched by investigators. It isn't clear why this wasn't done in the months after it was found, but when they eventually did so, they found biological material on the passenger seat and a few pieces of loose cardboard that were found inside the vehicle. They also found hair in the car's trunk. The biological material wasn't tested for years, but in 2003, it was found to belong to Kimberly, suggesting that she'd been the victim of foul play. It was then revealed that biological material had also been found in the couple's apartment. Kimberly's mother also told investigators that when she was in the apartment on one occasion, she came across a picture that had the words "Die soon" written across it. For years, it was speculated that the couple had disappeared together, whether willingly or not, until 2004, when Omar was arrested on charges relating to illegal substances. He would be arrested again the following year, after he attempted to steal his mother's boyfriend's identity by using his driver's license. Investigators finally had a chance to question him about Kimberly's disappearance, but he refused to cooperate since he didn't want to incriminate himself. Kimberly's mother became convinced that Omar was responsible for her daughter's disappearance, and she filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him in 2007. In her suit, she stated that she was seeking $25,000 in compensation, but the judge in the case rewarded her $4.5 million as she believed Omar was responsible not only for her disappearance, but also for her passing. Omar still refuses to discuss the case with investigators, and many people believe that he is indeed responsible for ending her life, though his motive remains unclear. It's also been speculated that his mother has knowledge of what happened that day, but that she isn't saying anything since it would incriminate her son, who was already serving time in jail for the identity theft case. Many people who followed this case expressed their frustration about the investigation, as they believed not everything that could have been done was done. They've asked why Omar's mother was never questioned properly, and why it took so long before Kimberly's car was searched, but the answers remain elusive. If you have any information on this case, you're asked to contact the Lorraine Police Department at 440-204-2193. Kimberly's nameless case number is MP7945. Having someone you know and love go missing can be a harrowing and stressful experience, but it must be even more unsettling to find out that an entire town has vanished without a trace, and it's not as uncommon as one might think. The most famous example of this must be the Roanoke colony, which disappeared in August of 1590. It's a strange tale that's left us baffled for centuries, and it's unlikely that we will ever find further answers to solve the mystery. It all began when a group of settlers, about 115 altogether, relocated from England to Roanoke Island in the US. After establishing their community, their leader, John White, decided that he would make his way back to England in order to restock the colony's dwindling supplies. He would, however, get stuck in England thanks to the war between Spain and England, and he would only make his way back to Roanoke 3 years later. But upon his arrival, he was dismayed at what he found. The entire colony had disappeared without a trace, and the only clue that he could find was the word Croatoan, which had been carved into a wooden post. Despite searching high and low, neither White nor the authorities ever found any trace of the colony's inhabitants, and we can only speculate as to what may have happened. There are theories that a tribe living on the island of Croatoan may have attacked the colony, and either ended everyone's lives or taken them back to the island with them. Others believe that the colony members may have become desperate when White didn't return, and so they decided to sail back to England but never made it back. This is a well-known case that pretty much everyone agrees will never make any further progress. But there is another similar mystery that also needs solving, which is the disappearance of the town of Urkhammer, which was situated in Iowa. We're uncertain just how well known the town of Urkhammer was, since there's no record of when the town was established or who may have lived there. But an article that was published in the Clarion Sun Telegraph in 1929 assures us that it really did exist, despite the doubts of many who have heard the tale. The article reported that a pilot flew over the town. The town seemed completely deserted. One would imagine that he saw empty buildings, cars that had been abandoned by their owners, and businesses that had been boarded up, but this wasn't the case. The areas where buildings once stood were now completely empty, with no sign that anyone had ever built there. Where there should have been roads, there was nothing but open land and fields, and it was as if the entire town had been swallowed up into nothingness, or as if it was never really there to begin with. But as strange as that sounds, things were about to get a whole lot weirder. A man who was passing through the area decided to stop over in Urkhammer just a week after the aerial photographs were taken. But he was even more unsuccessful than the pilot was. The man arrived in Urkhammer just in time, as his car was about to run out of gas. He stopped at a gas station in town and filled his gas tank, thankful that he could continue on with his journey. But as soon as he drove out of town, he would also fall victim to the strangeness of Urkhammer. He had only driven 2 miles out of town when his car began to sputter, and eventually it came to a full stop after it had run out of gas. He made up his mind to confront the owner of the gas station, who had clearly ripped him off, putting in no gas while gladly accepting the man's money. He had no choice but to walk the 2 miles back to town, but after 2 hours of retracing his steps, he had still not made it back to town, despite being able to see some of the buildings in the distance, which he found very strange and frustrating. Another motorist eventually passed him on the road, and recognizing that he may be in trouble, shared some of the gas from his car's tank, and the man was free to go on his way. But the ordeal had such a lasting impact on him that he needed psychiatric care and would end up receiving treatment at a sanatorium for a short while. Another version of this tale states that the traveler actually stopped outside of Urkhammer, where he found the gas station to be desolate and abandoned. He stated that it seemed as though the station and the nearby shops had been abandoned for a long time with no signs of life anywhere. He decided to report the matter to the people of Urkhammer, which was about 3 miles away according to the signs next to the road. But no matter how far or fast he drove, he could never find the town. He had covered about 4 miles but never saw any indication that he was getting closer to the town, and he was rapidly running out of gas. He decided to return to the gas station, but he was overwhelmed by a feeling of loss, and he became certain that the town had suffered some terrible fate. Many people have attempted to solve this mystery by looking for the town, and some have even claimed that they were able to find it, but reported that the streets were completely empty, as was the case with the motorist, not a single soul in sight. Then there's the tale of a group of farm families that was moving from Illinois to California, and along their route, they decided to stop outside of Urkhammer to set up camp. They were low on supplies, and so 2 men from the group were told to head into town for fresh stock. but they returned empty-handed with a strange story. They claimed they had reached the town, but when they attempted to walk into the general store, they found that their feet passed right through the building's front steps, as if it were a hologram. Unwilling to believe their fantastical tale, a larger group was sent to town, but they encountered the same problem, and the group, now thoroughly unsettled, decided to move on after reporting the strange incident to the Iowa State Police, who immediately investigated. They went to Erkhammer's sheriff's office, but when they attempted to open the door, their hands passed right through, just as had happened to the previous group. Many believe the tale of Erkhammer to be a complete fabrication, but a woman wrote to the editor of the Clarion Sun-Telegraph to say that she worked as a school teacher in Erkhammer and she was unimpressed with the strange tale about the town. But despite this, the town has still never been found, and it's unlikely that we will ever know what happened to Erkhammer or its inhabitants. That is, if it ever existed in the first place. People have been known to go missing in the blink of an eye, with people reporting seeing someone right in front of them and they turn away for a few seconds only to find that the person they were looking at has completely disappeared when they look back, never to be found. These cases are almost impossible to explain, let alone solve, and it all becomes all the more frustrating when no sign of the missing person is ever found. Usually, investigators would come across at least some of their belongings like a wallet, a phone, or an item of their clothing. But there have been many reported cases where not a single clue was left behind. What must be even more disconcerting and confusing, however, is if someone disappears while they're in full view of onlookers, seemingly blinking out of existence with no explanation or indication of what had happened. This is exactly what happened in the strange disappearance of David Lang, a farmer who lived near Gallatin, Tennessee in 1880. David was married to Emma, and they had 2 children, namely George, who was 8 years old, and Sarah, who was 11 at the time. The only other occupants on the farm were the family's servants, but they would receive visits from friends very often. And it's this fact that makes this story so strange, since it wasn't just David's family who witnessed a very bizarre incident, but their friends as well. On the 23rd of September of that year, David was relaxing on his farmhouse's porch since it was a scorching hot summer. George and Sarah were playing on the lawn in front of the house while Emma was inside. Given the unrelenting heat, George became concerned that his horses may be affected, and he decided to move them to a shadier area, just as Emma came walking out of the house onto the porch. At the same time, they noticed that Judge August Peck, who was a friend of the family, was approaching the farm on his horse-drawn buggy, together with his brother-in-law, and the 2 children became excited, since Peck usually arrived with a few presents. David also noticed the buggy, and after finishing his task, he turned back to the house, giving a wave to his friend as he did so. But then something truly bizarre and inexplicable happened that has not been explained to this day. Most reports say that David took about 6 steps back towards the house when his foot seemed to strike something on the ground that caused him to stumble and fall, which was obviously worrisome to the onlookers. But what caused them real concern was the fact that as he hit the ground, he completely disappeared into thin air in full view of everyone present. Emma let out a scream, and everyone ran over to the spot where they'd last seen David, but there was nothing and no one to be seen. At first, they thought he might be playing a prank on them, and that he was hidden behind something in the field, but despite searching every inch of the area where David was, they were unable to find him. By now, Emma and the children were in a state of panic, and they alerted their neighbors who arrived at the farm in quick time to aid in the search. The entire family searched multiple times, with people stomping their feet on the ground in an effort to find a crevice or a hole that David may have fallen into, but to no avail. Fearing that something might happen to one of the children, Emma called for the county surveyor to check the farm's grounds, but he too was unable to find anything wrong, stating that the farm's grounds were good and solid and that there were no areas that were deemed dangerous. In fact, he found that bedrock ran just a few feet under the field, and so it could have been impossible for a cave-in to occur that would have allowed David to be swallowed whole. Emma became sick with worry and confusion, and she eventually spent most of her time sick in bed. When the following year rolled around, George and Sarah noticed that the grass in the area where David went missing was dying, in contrast to the surrounding field. The yellowing grass formed a circle of about 15 feet around the area. Before they could report the strange find to their mother, though, they heard David's voice calling for help, though he was nowhere to be seen, and it seemed as though he was calling from another dimension. This would happen on a few more occasions, but as time went by, David's calls for help grew even fainter, and eventually they stopped completely. George noticed that the horses refused to go anywhere near the circle of yellowed grass, and on one occasion, he and Sarah decided to conduct an experiment. They caught a cricket and threw it into the strange patch of grass. The cricket immediately stopped chirping and hopped out of the circle where it started chirping again. They also noticed that no other insects or animals ever entered the circle, as if they were avoiding it at all costs. Emma never got over the disappearance of her husband, and she eventually decided to relocate, allowing Judge Peck to rent the farm out, as long as the field where David was last seen was left as it was until she passed away. It's impossible to ascertain what really happened to David, and hence there are many theories on the subject, one of which is that he somehow crossed paths with a doorway to another dimension, which he then fell into. Some people think that David was abducted by extraterrestrials, but this wouldn't explain why his family was able to hear his voice for months after he disappeared. Then there are those who believe that the entire story is a piece of fiction. But one man named Stuart Palmer strongly disagrees. Palmer received a first-hand account of the event from Sarah Lang, David's daughter, and she would add that she made contact with a spiritual medium after her mother passed away, and she was told that her mother was also still searching for David in the afterlife. One last interesting detail that she added was that after the farm was sold, the new owner wanted to have the field where David disappeared plowed, but no matter how many times he did so, the circle of grass would always grow back in the exact same spot. Many parents find it hard when their children head off to college, as it is in most cases the first time that their child will be living away from home. But it must be absolutely devastating to find out that one of your children has gone missing while away from college, which is what happened to a woman named Mary Carpenter in Denton, Texas. Mary was born in Texarkana, Texas in 1927, and she showed remarkable development as a baby, and she started walking much earlier than expected, and her mother would have to resort to telling her that large dogs patrolled the streets outside their house, just to keep her from leaving their yard unsupervised. At 3 years old, she became ill with influenza, and given the state of medicine at the time, she was left to fight through the illness by herself, and when she finally got better, doctors found that the illness had caused an infection in her right hip, and this had a lasting effect, as one of her legs was now shorter than the other. Although she was a smart girl, Virginia never excelled at school because of her limp. She was rather shy and reserved, but she did try out for the majorettes, and against everyone's expectation, she made the squad. She would eventually graduate from Arkansas High in 1944, after which she continued her education at the University of Arkansas, after she decided that she wanted to pursue a career as a journalist. But after a year of studying, she decided to alter her course towards becoming a lab technician. But before she could do so, her mother fell ill, and she fell in love with a man named Mac, who worked at the hospital where her mother was being cared for. They became engaged, but Virginia would end the relationship shortly before the wedding, as their personalities started to clash. She then attended Texarkana Junior College, after which she planned to move to the Texas State College for Women in Denton. When the day arrived for Virginia to leave for college on the 1st of June 1948, Virginia's mother asked if she could drive her to the campus in her car, but Virginia said that she would rather take the train, and she made it to the train station just in time. 6 hours later, she had arrived in Denton, and she, along with a woman called Marjorie Webster, who she met on the train, hailed a taxi that was being driven by a man named Edgar Zachary. Zachary dropped Marjorie off at the Fitzgerald dorms, but Virginia realized that she left her suitcase at the train station, and she paid Zachary 75 cents to take her back to collect it. Marjorie offered to accompany her, but Virginia insisted that she go alone. Upon arrival back at the station, though, she was unable to find her luggage, and she was told by an employee named Mr. Buttrell that it would be arriving on a later train. Zachary offered to pick the luggage up for her the next morning, and Virginia agreed, signing the back of the claim ticket so that he could do so. From here, all we have to go on are witness statements, the first being from Zachary, who told investigators that he drove Virginia to Brackenridge Hall at the college, and as they arrived, he noticed a light-colored convertible parked outside. He added that Virginia then got out of the taxi and walked over to the convertible, where she had a conversation with the two men who were standing next to it. When asked to describe the men, he told investigators that one was tall and the other was short and stocky. He got the impression that Virginia and the two men knew each other, and he left the luggage that she did have with her on the curb, since the two men had offered to carry it for her. He then got back into his taxi and drove away. Some reports would later state that a guard at the dorm saw Virginia getting into the convertible with the two men, but police investigators later refuted this claim. Zachary would return the next day with Virginia's trunk, and he left it on the curb as she asked, but 2 days later, it was still in the same spot and it was eventually taken to the college's office. It wasn't until 3 days later when Kenny Branham, who was Virginia's boyfriend at the time, failed to get a hold of her that anyone started to suspect that something was wrong. Branham contacted Virginia's mother to tell her that he couldn't get in touch with her, and Mrs. Carpenter started to become concerned. She contacted the college to get more details, but she was told that Virginia never enrolled for her classes, and so she decided to contact Virginia's friends to hear if they had seen her, but to no avail. She then reported Virginia as missing to the Denton Police Department, but she was told to go to bed and that they would take a look at the case the following day. Mrs. Carpenter, however, decided to travel to Denton with her friend Lucille Bailey, and they were soon joined by other members of their family and some of Virginia's friends. Searches were carried out by airplanes and boats. The nearby wooded areas were searched by foot, as were any storm drains, wells, outbuildings, and rural areas, but no one was able to find any trace of Virginia. Drivers of light-colored convertibles were questioned, but investigators came up empty-handed, and it started to feel as though Virginia had disappeared into thin air. Farmers and hunters in the area were informed of Virginia's disappearance and told to be on the lookout for any shallow graves, and Virginia's photo was sent to police departments all over Texas. When her trunk that had been delivered to the campus was searched, it offered no clues as to where she may be, and a reward of $1,368 was offered for any information leading to her whereabouts. Zachary agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed, and investigators were satisfied that he wasn't involved in her disappearance. But it would then come to light that Virginia did indeed know someone who owned a cream-colored convertible, but there was no evidence tying them to the case. A few small leads came in and they were all followed up on, but nothing came of it, and Virginia remained missing. A gas station attendant in Abritt, Texas contacted the police to report that he had seen Virginia sitting in a yellow convertible with two men and another woman 2 days after she had disappeared, but the car was never tracked down. Another sighting came from a DeQueen bus station ticket attendant, who stated that she saw Virginia at the station where she nervously waited for someone while asking about hotels in the area. Investigators showed her Virginia's photo, and she confirmed that that was the woman she saw. She eventually met up with a man of around 25 years old, and they left the bus station together. But just a few minutes after they had left, the woman received a phone call from someone asking for Virginia Carpenter. Investigators contacted hotels in the area, but they were never able to find anyone who had seen Virginia. And later, the witness from the bus station stated that she was unsure if she really did recognize Virginia from the photo that was shown to her. A few more sightings were reported, but none were of any use to investigators, and Virginia's case grew cold. After 7 years of investigation, it was decided that she be legally declared deceased. In 1959, investigators found a wooden box that contained the remains of a female with the same deformity in her leg that Virginia had, but after being examined in Austin, they were found to belong to someone else after the dental records came back as a negative match. 39 years later, a man came forward to tell investigators that he had information on Virginia's case. He said that her life had been ended and that he knew who the culprit was, as well as where she had been buried, which was a location on the college's grounds. The area was excavated, but all that was found was a rubber boot and a glove, neither of which belonged to Virginia, and to this day, she has still not been found. Many people believe that Virginia simply decided to start a new life somewhere else, but most believe that she wouldn't just disappear of her own free will, leaving her mother with no answers. Other theories include suggestions that she somehow hit her head, causing her to develop amnesia, and this is why she never found her way home. The prevailing theory, though, is that she was kidnapped by someone at the campus, possibly the driver of the convertible, and that foul play was involved. As with many of these types of cases, this is all mere speculation, and we may never learn what Virginia's fate truly was. It's often the case that someone acts out of character in the days or weeks leading up to their disappearance. Sometimes this is caused by stressful circumstances in their daily lives, work pressure, or trouble with their relationship, and it's often cited as a major contributor in their cases. This type of behavior was also noted as important in the bizarre disappearance of a woman called Patricia Meehan. Patricia grew up in Pittsburgh, where she was born in 1951, and she had an unremarkable childhood. After graduating from high school, she would move to Oklahoma City, where she attended college as she was interested in working as a daycare professional. She dropped out of college though, after which she started working as a ranch hand in Bozeman, Montana. In 1989 though, Patricia decided that she wanted to move back to Pittsburgh, and she contacted her father to tell him about her plans. She said that she found the work in Bozeman to be too stressful, but she didn't go into any further detail. Her landlord would also tell investigators that she'd been acting out of character the last time that he saw her, stating that while she was usually a quiet and shy person, on that occasion she seemed hyperactive, and although he thought it to be strange, he didn't think too much of it. A day after talking to her father, Patricia was driving along northwest on Highway 200 near Circle, Montana, when she seemingly lost control of her car and veered across the road violently, nearly hitting a car containing a woman named Peggy Bueller and her father. Unfortunately, she failed to avoid the collision with the car behind them, which was being driven by Carol Heights, a police dispatcher, but luckily no one came to any harm as the result of the accident. After witnessing the collision, Peggy and her father pulled over in case they needed to provide details to the police, and as Carol exited her car, she saw that Patricia was in the process of getting out of hers as well. But she noticed that Patricia seemed to be dazed, seemingly not realizing that there were other people present. Everyone expected Patricia to wait by her car until the police arrived, but to their surprise, she walked to a nearby fence, climbed over it, and continued walking into a nearby field, after giving only a passing glance to her wrecked car. Peggy decided to contact the police, and by the time they arrived at the scene, Patricia had still not returned. It became a matter of urgency since Patricia was now a suspect that had fled from the scene of an accident, and her car's license plate was checked. Investigators started a search of the field into which she had disappeared, but their efforts were in vain as Patricia was nowhere to be found, despite following her footprints into nearby bushes where they disappeared. The following day, Patricia's family traveled to the scene of the accident to aid in the search by handing out flyers containing Patricia's photo and searching the surrounding area as thoroughly as they could with the help of police search teams. Volunteers from the surrounding community also helped with the search efforts, which were being conducted not only on foot, but also with the help of ATVs, helicopters, and officers on horseback. But again, their efforts proved fruitless. Patricia's family and the investigators were at a loss as to why she was driving on this road, since it's over 400 miles from her hometown of Bozeman, and there had been no indication from her that she would be traveling this far. The best that anyone could do was speculate, and it was theorized that she may have walked to another road and hitchhiked out of the area before the searches were started. Another possibility is that she hid inside a hay delivery truck that had been parked nearby, and she either left the town in the truck or later snuck out and hitchhiked somewhere else. Strangely, no one other than the motorists involved in the accident saw Patricia in the hours after the crash, which is truly inexplicable. However, soon after news of her disappearance broke, investigators were inundated with calls from people who claimed to have seen her. Literally thousands of leads came in, one of which came from a police officer in Laverne, Minnesota, who reported seeing Patricia walking from a restaurant to another restaurant, ordering nothing but water at each one. Many people also reported seeing her at truck stops between Montana and Seattle, but investigators found that the woman in question had left the area by the time they responded, usually by hitchhiking. Strangely, Patricia was also spotted back in Bozeman by a waitress who stated that she was acting strangely. She demanded to be served quickly, and when the waitress asked her if she had to get back to work, she replied that she was simply going shopping, leaving the waitress wondering why she was in such a rush to finish her breakfast. Another waitress at the restaurant told investigators that Patricia was talking to herself, and that she seemed disconnected from the world around her. Despite insisting that she was in a hurry, she spent nearly 90 minutes in the restaurant, staring out of the window for most of that time. At one point, she was seen by a truck driver in Washington, who said that she was walking next to the road and he stopped to offer her a ride, but she declined. Shortly after that, a woman also saw her and pulled off in her car to ask if she was all right, but the woman thought to be Patricia told her that she was looking for a phone since her car had broken down, but that she would be fine. Despite thousands of leads that were followed in Patricia's case, not a single further clue has ever been found, and she remains a missing person to this day. When we think of missing person cases, the last image that comes to mind is that of a 1700s pirate. But that's exactly what happened with Henry Avery, who went missing in 1695. It's believed that Avery was born in or near Devon, England in 1659, though some records date his birth as late as 1665. And being accustomed to the ocean thanks to his father who served in the Royal Navy, his first job was serving on a merchant vessel. Some records show that Avery then joined the Royal Navy, though this is disputed, but it's believed that it's during this time that he acquired a taste for piracy. He was soon given the ironic nickname Long John, which was the exact opposite of his physical appearance, since he was described as being of average height and overweight. After leaving the Royal Navy, Avery joined a ship which sought to find and imprison smugglers in the Caribbean Sea, and this is where his true nature came to the fore. While his captain was intoxicated one night, Avery, who served as a second mate, met with about 100 of his fellow sailors, and together they decided to mutiny after they'd grown ever more impatient with their wages not being paid. The mutiny was successful, and Avery was nominated as the ship's new captain. It was renamed from Charles II to Fancy, and the crew decided to set sail for Madagascar. Along the way, they teamed up with 2 other pirate ships, together making up a formidable force. En route to Madagascar, Avery and his companions looted 6 different vessels that they encountered on the open sea while displaying the Jolly Roger on his ship. He eventually arrived in Madagascar, where he went to work on assembling a fleet, and before long, he had an entourage of 6 ships that followed his command. And he didn't have to wait too long before his efforts paid off. In 1695, Avery and his crew encountered the Ganjai Sawai, a ship that belonged to the head of the Mughal Empire of India. But the fight for the Ganjai Sawai's treasures would not be an easy one, since it was being accompanied by a fleet of ships as protection, since it was carrying an unimaginable amount of valuables. One of the ships, the Fateh Mohammed, was the first to fall to Avery's men, and a total of $14 million in today's currency was lost to the pirates. But this was a drop in the bucket compared to what was contained inside the Ganjai Sawai, and Avery set sail in pursuit. Both ships were fitted with cannons, and an almighty battle broke out that lasted more than 2 hours, but Avery's men managed to destroy the Ganjai Sawai's mainsail, and the ship was quickly overrun by the pirates, earning Avery the nickname Arch Pirate. When all was said and done, Avery and his men sailed away with around $95 million worth of treasure, if converted to modern currency, and it was at the time considered to be one of the biggest pirate hauls ever recorded. The ship was found to contain jewelry, gold, silver, spices, silk, and gemstones, everything that a pirate could ever dream of. Each of the men got a fair share of the takings, ensuring that they would never have to work another day in their lives. But that's when things started going downhill. When the emperor, who owned the Ganjai Sawai, got wind of the attack and the amount of money that he had lost, he understandably became enraged and informed the British government that if Avery and his men were not brought to justice, he would start imprisoning every British trader in India, and he followed through on his threat. The East India Company responded by placing a $1,000 bounty on the heads of each of Avery's men, and the British government added another 500 to that total. But search as they might, Avery and his men were long gone, reportedly having sailed to the Caribbean, where they all went their separate ways. It's believed that Avery set sail for Rhode Island, after which he traveled to Ireland, but this has never been confirmed. Captain William Kidd was tasked with tracking down the pirates, specifically Avery, but he failed to do so, and in the end, he decided to abandon his old life for a life of piracy as well. The governor of Jamaica later reported that he was offered a substantial bribe in exchange for a royal pardon of the pirates, but he declined, and Avery and his men remained wanted fugitives. In 1698, the British government decided that the pirates would be granted amnesty on the condition that they surrendered themselves to Captain Thomas Warren, but it was specifically mentioned that Avery and Kidd were to be excluded, and that they were to be apprehended on sight. There were reports that Avery eventually traveled back to England, where he intended to sell a cache of diamonds, but he was outfoxed by a swindler, and he was forced to live a life of poverty in order to keep his identity hidden from the authorities. Most of Every's 113-man crew managed to escape the long arm of the law, but 14 of his men were eventually apprehended, 6 of which were sentenced to be executed. Authorities received many reports that Every had been sighted in England over the years, but he was never apprehended. Following his enormous haul, many other men were inspired by Every, and they left their everyday lives for a life of piracy, believing that they too could stumble upon a great treasure that would secure their financial futures. Many people still consider Every to be the greatest pirate that ever lived, not only because of the treasure that he stole, but because he managed to evade the law for the rest of his life, and we can only speculate where he ended up and what he did with his ill-gotten gains. 19-year-old Jason Anthony Jakowski was your average 2000s teenager, and Jason was described as a shy and kind young mind with a bright future ahead of him. By 2001, Jason was enrolled part-time at Iowa Western Community College in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and held a part-time job. Jason had big dreams of becoming a DJ, and the community college course put him one step closer. In June of 2001, Jakowski's world fell apart when Jason disappeared without a trace, and his case remains unsolved 22 years later. On June 24, 1981, Kelly Murphy and Jim Jakowski welcomed their son Jason into the world. When Jason was born, doctors believed he had a mild developmental disability which affected his speech. Jason didn't let his disability hold him back, and throughout his childhood, he obtained good grades and attendance. Shortly after the birth of Jason, the Jakowskis welcomed another son, Michael, into the world. Life went on as usual for the Jakowskis. Jason graduated from Benson High School with excellent grades and was accepted into an Iowa Western Community College program. As the course was part-time, Jason got a job at Fazoli's restaurant to help supplement his income. His employers described him as a hard-working and sensible young man, and everyone enjoyed working with him. Jason's dreams of becoming a DJ were just within reach, but on June 13th, something bizarre happened. June 13th of 2001 started out like any other day for the Jakowskis. Kelly and Jim headed off to work, leaving Michael and Jason at home. June signaled the start of summer break, but the fun would have to wait this summer. Jason had taken the spring semester off because he couldn't pay the tuition, leading him to work more hours at Fazoli's to cover his next semester's tuition. Early that morning, Jason received a call from his manager, asking him to come in earlier than usual to cover. In need of extra money, Jason agreed. Jason usually made the short journey to work in his car, but his car was being repaired at the garage. Fazoli's was only around 4 miles from the family home, so Jason offered to walk there. Jason's manager was known to be very accommodating and arranged for one of Jason's coworkers to pick him up on his way. The two spoke via phone and agreed to meet at Benson High School. Benson High School was just a few blocks from the family home, and at around 10:45 a.m., Jason left his home, and this would be the last time he was ever seen or heard from. Jason never made it to Benson High School, and his coworker waited for him until around 11:30 a.m. She made several calls to the restaurant, telling her boss Jason was nowhere to be seen. Eventually, she drove off, hoping that Jason had chosen to walk to work or forgotten their arrangement. Hours passed, but there was still no sign of Jason. He never turned up for his shift, and his manager called the Jakowski home to check on it. Jason's manager was horrified to discover that Jason wasn't at home either. Later that evening, Jim and Kelly arrived home to every parent's worst nightmare. Jason wasn't home, and Michael told his parents that his boss had called and was looking for him. Jim and Kelly sprang into action and searched the local area, but there was no sign of Jason. Jason's parents tried to report him missing to the Omaha Police Department, but they refused. They told Jason's parents that their policy was that they needed to wait 24 hours before filing a missing person report. Distraught, Jason's parents continued their search and returned to the Omaha Police Department later that day. Finally, a report was filed, but the investigation was lackluster. The Omaha Police Department considered Jason to be yet another runaway, but his parents knew otherwise. When almost 2 weeks had passed without any sign of Jason, the Omaha Police Department switched their approach. They looked through CCTV footage of Benson High School and discovered that on June 13th, Jason was never spotted on camera, meaning he never made it to the school. Since that breezy June day, no evidence has ever been uncovered to point investigators to his whereabouts. Jason was due to start a new job in late June, and his parents knew that he would not leave of his own accord. Everyone in Jason's life was questioned and interrogated, but nothing ever came of this. Jason was an ordinary teenager who never got into trouble, so why did he disappear without a trace? He left behind around $650, and there's been no activity on his phone or bank accounts since his disappearance. There are several theories in Jason's case, some of which are bizarre and even implausible. The prevailing theory is that Jason was kidnapped on his way to Benson High School, but by who and why? Jason had no enemies and no trace or evidence was left behind at the scene. Another theory is that Jason left of his own accord, although his family has refuted this theory several times. With little evidence and even fewer witness statements, we may never know what happened to Jason Jakowski. Anyone with information is asked to contact Sergeant Brett Schrage of the Omaha Police Department at 402-444-4127, quoting case number RB85214T. 32-year-old Pamela Page and her husband of 12 years, Robert Page, lived in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Peoria, Arizona. The two had wed in 1977 and had moved into the area shortly after their wedding. By 1989, the pair ran a successful business, Fast Forward Video, and to the outside world, it appeared their marriage was perfect. Behind closed doors, things were very different. One July morning would change Robert's life forever, leaving him with the missing spouse and an investigation on his shoulders. The last confirmed sighting of Pamela was on July 21, 1989, at Fast Forward Video, the video rental shop she and her husband Robert co-owned. Pamela worked the evening shift at the store, and an employee on duty told investigators that Pamela seemed normal. The two spoke of the possibility of another shop opening soon, and she appeared excited about the future. At around 8:30 p.m., Pamela left the store and headed home. This employee would be the last person outside the household to see Pamela alive. When Pamela returned home that evening, Robert noticed that her behavior had changed drastically. She was crying and sifting through family photos. Pamela refused to tell Robert what was wrong and told him that she would sleep on the sofa for the night. Robert went back to bed alone. On July 22, 1989, Robert awoke to find his wife downstairs sorting through her clothes. Pamela's bizarre behavior from the night before had carried over, and he was concerned. Pamela asked Robert to open the store for her as she was unwell. At 8 a.m., Robert left the Peoria home not knowing it would be the last time he would see his wife. July 22nd carried on as usual for Robert. He handed over the evening shift to an employee, returning home around 4 p.m. When he returned, he noticed a bizarre note on the table. It was from Pamela. The 2-page letter, which Pamela supposedly wrote, addressed Robert and their marital issues. She told Robert she had left town with a friend named Sarah and had taken $60,000 with her, though some sources say that this was only $8,000. She also mentioned in the handwritten note that she had left her beloved yellow 1981 Corvette outside of a local donut shop. Robert claims to have found the car, but it remains to be seen whether this was processed as evidence. Pamela's family called Rob days after she was last seen. However, at this point, her family had no idea she was missing. When they asked how Pam was, Rob finally admitted that she was missing. Pamela's family panicked and demanded that he report her missing to the Peoria Police Department. Rob told Pam's sister, Trina, that he had been too embarrassed to file a report, as his wife had left him for another woman. Days after Pamela's disappearance, Rob told her family a report had been filed, and the family traveled to Arizona to assist in the investigation. As soon as her family saw the note, they knew something was wrong. The signature was not Pamela's. Pamela's sister, Trina, and her father spoke to the Peoria Police Department to get an update on her case, and that's when they learned a missing person report had never been filed. Finally, weeks after she was last seen, Pamela Page was officially reported missing. The eyes of suspicion immediately fell upon Robert, and he told investigators that Pamela had disappeared sometime between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. on July 22, 1989. After opening the Fast Forward Video store, Robert told investigators he visited local auto shops and garages looking for an ignition switch. As per his version of events, his car refused to start at one of the shops, and he had to get a taxi home to retrieve the part that he'd been shopping for. This is where Robert's story begins to crumble. He then returned to the shop, fixed his truck, and drove home. There was just one problem. None of the employees at these shops recalled seeing Robert on the 22nd. So was he lying? Robert's defense crumbled further when the Arizona State Crime Lab determined that the signature on the note was fraudulent. Pamela's family's suspicions had been confirmed, but there was no evidence to link Robert to the case conclusively. In light of these new findings, Robert's story changed drastically. He confessed to writing the last 4 lines of the note and signing it in Pamela's name. He sheepishly claimed that he did this to cover up the fact that his wife had left him for a woman, and to spare himself the embarrassment. Over the years, elements of Robert's story changed, and he continues to defend himself. Investigators offered him a chance to take a lie detector test, but he refused. It's important to note that lie detector tests are unreliable and don't hold up in court. In another iteration of his story, Robert claimed to have found the home in disarray, with family photos, rerun, their beloved dog, and other items missing from the house. The elusive Sarah has never been found, and those closest to Pamela cannot recall her ever being friends with a woman named Sarah. Just weeks after Pamela disappeared, Robert hired a private investigator and filed for divorce. He also filed for bankruptcy at Fast Forward Video, despite the business being profitable and on track to open another location. The general consensus is that Pamela Page didn't sign the note, but what happened to her? Pamela's family even became so desperate for answers that they consulted Carol Pate, a psychic. Carol allegedly had a vision in which she saw the pair arguing. Her vision then moved to Pamela being asphyxiated by Robert before being dumped. Carol also offered up the clues Coolidge and 241. The final part of her vision included Pamela being buried near a gray factory near a railroad. According to the TV show Unsolved Mysteries, reporter Jenna Thorson caught wind of Carol's predictions and decided to see for herself. She found a gray factory near a railroad and stumbled across a sign with 241 on it. According to Jana, the route from Pamela and Robert's home to the factory ended at a street named Coolidge. Some sources have also reported that days before Pamela's disappearance, Robert had made arrangements to sell her car without her knowledge. Robert Brooks Page passed away in 2009, taking his secrets to the grave. Multiple sources state that Robert is no longer a suspect, but in 2017, Pamela's family received a letter from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, which said that if Robert were still alive, he would have been charged with Pamela's disappearance. Robert is obviously no longer with us, and the mystery behind Pamela's sudden disappearance remains unknown. There have been a few alleged sightings over the years, but these have never been confirmed. 2023 marks the 34th anniversary of Pamela's disappearance. If still alive today, she would be 66 years old. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Russell Davis of the Peoria Police Department's Cold Case Unit at 623-773-5040, quoting case number 893936. 19-year-old Caitlin Akins had built the perfect life for herself. She had moved from Virginia to Arizona to be with the love of her life and was getting ready to start cosmetology school. Caitlin always visited her family in Virginia, and December of 2015 was an exceptionally special time for the Akins family. Caitlin arrived safely in Virginia, promising her fiancé she would be back in a matter of days. Just days after Caitlin arrived, her fiancé received a letter that would send her world crashing down around her. Caitlin was born and raised in Virginia, surrounded by a large, loving family. When she was young, her mother remarried James Branton. Unfortunately, the relationship didn't last, but Caitlin and Gabby kept in touch with their former stepdad. While James and Caitlin's relationship hadn't always been perfect, things had improved as she got older. Throughout her schooling years, Caitlin had been exceptionally close to one person, Amber Rios. Amber and her family moved to Arizona, which devastated Caitlin. As the two blossomed into teenagers, their friendship blossomed into romance. In 2014, Caitlin moved to Arizona to be with the love of her life. By 2015, the relationship had gone from strength to strength, and Caitlin was preparing to enroll in cosmetology school. But there was one problem. She needed her high school diploma. The need for her certificate was perfect timing, as her sister Gabby had just given birth to her first child. This gave Caitlin plenty of reason to fly out to see her family and collect her certificate. On December 1st, 2015, Caitlin made the 4-hour flight to Springfield, Virginia. Her return flight was booked for 5 days later on December 5th. Caitlin and Amber kissed goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time they would see each other. Caitlin spent her time in Virginia between friends and family. Her sister Gabby told the media that Caitlin loved her son and felt that the family relationship was strong. Caitlin was incredibly excited about starting cosmetology school and couldn't wait to return to Arizona to complete her enrollment. On December 5th, Caitlin packed her bags and said her goodbyes. James, Caitlin's ex-stepfather, was her last resort. Everyone else in the family was busy and she desperately needed a ride to the airport. Some reports state that Caitlin and James's relationship had grown stronger over the years. But Kevin Eastridge told True Crime Daily that Caitlin didn't trust James and that she felt uncomfortable and nervous in his presence. Caitlin's flight was scheduled to leave at 5 p.m., but at 11:56 a.m., Amber Rios received a strange text from Caitlin, and it said, "Something came up. I'm not coming back today. I'll let you know when I get a new flight." Lisa, Caitlin's mother, and James had agreed that Caitlin would be dropped off at the airport before 3 p.m., as James was expected at work. At 1:52 p.m., James texted Lisa, letting her know Caitlin had been dropped off. Here is where things take a bizarre turn. James also added that Caitlin had asked him to drop her off at the Springfield metro station, a system she was unfamiliar with. At 2 p.m., Lisa received a text from Caitlin in which she wrote, "I'm at the airport, battery dying, so won't be able to text for a bit." 5 hours later, at 7:15 p.m., Caitlin sent her final message saying, quote, "I'm staying with a friend and I need some time alone." After this, Caitlin's phone fell silent. She didn't answer any calls or texts. Amber and Lisa had been communicating and agreed that something wasn't right. At first, the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office refused to take Lisa's report. That was until December 7th, when Caitlin's luggage was found in a drainage ditch on River Road in Fredericksburg, 47 miles from the Springfield metro station. The suitcase was scratched, scuffed, and missing a wheel, indicating it had been thrown down the ditch. Her clothes and high school diploma were the only things missing from the suitcase. Finally, investigators took a look at Caitlin's disappearance seriously and opened an investigation. Flight logs confirmed that Caitlin never made it onto her 5 p.m. flight to Arizona. James became nervous and shifty when questioned, deflecting blame and trying to change the story. Investigators discovered Caitlin's final message to her fiancé, Amber, via Facebook Messenger. She told Amber she couldn't come home because she had cheated on her. Amber and Lisa agreed that Caitlin was not behind these bizarre messages, nor was it likely that she asked to be dropped off at the metro station. When experts examined Caitlin's 1:56 p.m. text, they found something bizarre. In the message, Caitlin claimed to be at the airport, but her phone had pinged at a tower over 30 miles from the metro stop. Likewise, when James sent his message at 2 p.m., his phone pinged near his residence, not near the airport or the metro station. Interestingly, Caitlin's final message, made at 7:15 p.m., pinged off a tower in Stafford, Virginia, 30 miles from the Springfield metro station and 15 miles from where her suitcase was found. CCTV footage was pulled from the metro station, airport, and mall, but there was no sign of Caitlin, James, or his car. Initially, James cooperated with the investigation, but the further they dug, the less cooperative he became. He refused to take a lie detector test and continues to be uncooperative. His home, phone, and car have been searched, but there's no evidence to link him to Caitlin's disappearance. During an interview with Ashley Flowers, Lisa voiced her concerns about James and the searches conducted on his property. Spotsylvania officers searched his primary residence, but Lisa claimed that James owned another property and a piece of land in Virginia. Unfortunately, a search warrant for his property has never been obtained, and it remains unsearched. Caitlin's friend and ex, Kevin, told investigators that before Caitlin disappeared, she texted him asking for advice. According to Kevin, while in Virginia, Caitlin attended a party with some old high school friends. At first, the female friend and her boyfriend forced themselves onto Caitlin. Later, after consuming many drinks, Caitlin, the female friend, and her boyfriend engaged in intercourse. Caitlin wanted to talk to Kevin as she felt guilty about her actions. Despite this new revelation, her family does not believe she left of her own accord. Her credit cards, debit cards, phone, plane tickets, and other items were found in the scuffed-up suitcase. Her family believe Caitlin met with foul play and unfortunately never made it to the airport or the metro station that day. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office at 540-507-7115, quoting case number 15109-739. 53-year-old Colleen Wood had one dream: to sail around the world. In late 1999, Colleen met the man of her dreams, or so she thought. Her family did not take well to her new partner, but Colleen continued dating him. Months after meeting her Romeo, Colleen embarked on what should have been the trip of a lifetime, but instead the trip would end in tragedy. In 1998, Colleen Wood moved from Dayton, Ohio to Boca Raton, Florida. By this point, Colleen was divorced, and her children were adults, so she decided to leave her old life behind in search of greener pastures. Colleen had always had an affinity for water and was instantly drawn to Boca Raton. Not only could she enjoy permanent sunshine, but she was also about to take up her dream job at the Lighthouse Point Marina. Colleen's son, Michael Tanderick, noticed an instant change in his mother. The change of scenery and job had given her a new lease of life, and she was even ready to jump back into the dating scene. Colleen posted a few ads and attended several singles nights, but never really clicked with anyone. That was until mid-1999, when she met John Paul Sr. John rushed her off of her feet after the two met through a newspaper ad. John was looking for a sailing companion on his 55-foot boat called the Island Girl. John showered Colleen with gifts and affection, telling her he had an MBA from Harvard, a successful company, and that he was famous in the US racing scene. Colleen was wowed from the moment she met John, and following that, the two became inseparable. Colleen and John spent their spare time aboard John's boat. Over long weekends, the two would travel around the US and Europe, taking the Island Girl with them. Colleen's family were suspicious of the new man in her life, and they were right to be so. For the sake of their mother, Colleen's children were civil with John. In early 2000, Colleen dropped a bombshell. She had sold her Boca Raton apartment and had quit her job. The money she made from selling her apartment went straight into John's pocket, as he assured her he would invest it safely. This sudden move made her family and friends nervous. She reassured them that John would take care of her and that they would live together on the Island Girl. Colleen's move was sudden and abrupt, and even her colleagues began to worry about her. She also dropped another bombshell. She had sold all of her belongings because she and John would sail around the world for the next 5 years. Colleen stated she felt safe with John and trusted him to guide her on the once-in-a-lifetime trip that she had been dreaming of. For the next few months, John and Colleen scrimped and saved for their trip. On December 3rd, 2000, Colleen called her son Michael to let him know that she'd be leaving for the trip in the next few weeks. The last confirmed contact with Colleen was made on December 13th or 14th by Maureen Canada, the marina's owner where Colleen had worked. Maureen later told investigators that Colleen was in high spirits and accepted her invitation to attend the office Christmas party on December 19th. Colleen never arrived at the Christmas party, signaling the beginning of the end. Shortly before setting sail, John changed the boat's name to the Diamond Girl, and by mid-December, the two hit the open seas. Christmas came and went without a word from Colleen, and her family immediately felt something was wrong. No matter where she was in the world, Colleen always called her family during the holidays. 2001 rang in, but there was no sign of Colleen. Friends and family tried furiously to call Colleen, but each call went unanswered. As weeks turned to months, her son Michael became distraught. Michael contacted his mother's phone provider in early January, only to discover that her account had been closed in late December due to a lack of payment. This prompted Michael to contact the Green Cove Springs Police Department to report his mother missing. Unfortunately, the Green Cove Springs Police Department paid little mind to Michael's report, and they reminded him that his mother was an adult who could come and go as she pleased. Michael was determined to find his mother, so he took to the internet. He furiously searched every term and name he could think of, including Island Girl, Diamond Girl, and John Paul Sr. What he discovered made his heart sink. John Paul Sr.'s name and picture were featured in an article from the mid-90s. In 1987, John was arrested in St. Johns County, Florida, for attempting to take someone's life. In the early 80s, John had been involved in a substance trafficking ring, which ended in a giant brawl. John Paul Sr. faced up to 20 years in prison, but served just 15. He was paroled in 1999 and met Colleen months later. Colleen had no idea she was sailing with a dangerous man who had previously fled the US to avoid conviction. Out of the blue, John became contactable and gave the first of many stories. His first story stated that he and Colleen had broken up in December, following an argument shortly after setting sail. His second version of events is as follows. He then claimed that while in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, he and Colleen had gotten into an argument where Colleen left the boat. According to Michael, Colleen returned with another man, grabbed all of her clothes, makeup, shoes, and everything else and left the boat for good. Michael didn't believe John's stories and pressured the Fort Lauderdale Police Department to take his mother's case seriously. In April of 2001, 2 agents were assigned to the case. Days into the investigation, the FLPD uncovered some shocking evidence. Between December and February of 2000 and 2001, Colleen had withdrawn over $40,000 across 80 transactions. The Fort Lauderdale police were extraordinarily forthcoming and stated that they had evidence to suggest that Colleen either didn't make the transactions or didn't consent to the transactions. Bizarrely, investigators also found that Colleen's credit card had paid for 2 advertisements in the local paper. One advertisement sought a female ship hand on the Diamond or Island Girl. The second was in the romance section. Why was John looking for a new ship hand, and where was Colleen? Years later, the people who used Colleen's credit cards to withdraw money were tracked down. They told investigators that a man instructed them to withdraw as much as possible, and he would keep a percentage of it. Investigators have never confirmed whether this man was John Paul Sr. John maintained his innocence, telling investigators that Colleen had left the boat with another man and had never contacted him again. Following the initial investigation, John left the US on the Diamond Girl, violating his parole terms. Investigators have been trying to track him down for years, and he's been spotted in Fiji, Jamaica, and Thailand. Detectives consider John Paul Sr. a suspect in Colleen's disappearance, but they can't move forward with a conviction without solid evidence. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Fort Lauderdale Police Department at 954-764-4357, quoting case number 0149804. 21-year-old Alyssa McLemore was described as a loving and caring young woman. Alyssa was proud of her heritage, being Black and Native American. Alyssa, who lived in Kent, Washington with her young daughter, was also a caregiver to her mother, Gracie McLemore. Gracie suffered from an excruciating condition which causes skin inflammation. Alyssa juggled her busy life and always made time for her family. April 9th of 2009 started like any other for McLemore. That morning, Alyssa told her grandmother, Barbara, she was leaving the house for a few hours and would return later that evening. Later that afternoon, Barbara called Alyssa in a panic. Gracie's condition had been rapidly declining over the previous few days, and by the beginning of April 9th, it was clear that the end was in sight. Alyssa answered the call and told her grandmother she would be there soon. Nightfall came and there was still no sign of Alyssa. Gracie called out for her daughter to soothe her pain and comfort her, but she was not there to hold her hand. By April 10th, Alyssa's family had become extremely concerned for her welfare. She wasn't answering her phone and none of her friends had seen her. At some point between the 9th and 10th of April, her family had attempted to file a missing person report with the Kent Police Department, but predictably, her family was told they needed to wait 24 hours. When the Kent Police Department finally took Alyssa's disappearance seriously, they uncovered chilling evidence. Phone records showed that Alyssa's phone made a 10-second call to 911 at 9:15 p.m. on April 10th. The audio clip has never been released, and we're left with just the transcript. In the call, Alyssa can be heard screaming for help, and a male voice features in the background, threatening to harm her. Days after the chilling call, Alyssa's phone went out of service. According to the Kent Police Department, Alyssa's phone didn't have a GPS chip, which meant the location of the call couldn't be traced. The Kent Police Department also commented that they couldn't verify whether Alyssa had been the one to place the call. While the call was made from her phone, the caller in the clip never identified themselves. In a recent 2023 interview, the Kent Police Department told King 5 Seattle that the call has never been released to preserve the integrity of the case, something that Alyssa's family and public refute. Alyssa's family noted the lack of interest in the case from the Kent Police and the media. Alyssa's disappearance received a few articles, but at the time, it didn't receive the widespread attention that other cases are afforded. 3 days after her daughter was last seen, Gracie McLemore passed away. Since her passing, her family has vowed to get justice and answers. Alyssa's case was featured in a few newspapers, which generated several leads. One witness claimed to have spotted Alyssa near 30th Avenue South and the Kent-Des Moines Road in Kent on April 9th. According to this witness, they saw a green 1990s pickup truck drive toward Alyssa. As reported by the Charlie Project, 30th Avenue South and Kent-Des Moines Road has a high population of street workers. Alyssa was known to have previous convictions for street work, although it's unknown whether she was working at the time of her disappearance. Most interestingly, the witness claimed that the strange green truck possibly had Oregon license plates. Kent sits around 160 miles from Portland, Oregon, close to the border with Washington. A second witness came forward with a possible sighting of Alyssa, although the exact location of this sighting has yet to be discovered. This witness alleges that they saw Alyssa with a white man in his 50s or 60s, around 5'8" and 175 to 185 pounds. Interestingly, this sighting also includes a green pickup truck. The witness also commented that the two appeared familiar with each other. Some sources have speculated that Alyssa may have accepted a ride with someone, as she usually relied on public transport and was unemployed at the time of her disappearance. Strangely, Alyssa's family has never been allowed to listen to the 911 call, depriving them of the opportunity to identify the male and female voices. Investigators have stated that the call will remain private while Alyssa's case is open. There's much speculation online as to why Alyssa's family and the public have not been allowed to listen to the call. There are several theories in Alyssa's case, the first being that she hitched a ride with someone she thought she could trust, only to be betrayed. Other theories range from kidnapping to Alyssa leaving of her own accord, although her family does not believe she would do this. Alyssa's daughter, Neva, is now close to adulthood and has spent her entire life looking for her mother. Alyssa's aunt, Tina, told the media that she called the morgue more times than anyone ever should in a lifetime. Every time a body is found, Tina calls the morgue, hoping they'll finally have answers. In 2019, the Kent Police Department decided to take another look at Alyssa's case, but they came up empty. In her case, they have 3 binders full of information, but none of this information is led anywhere. Her aunt Tina created a Facebook page to spread awareness and continues campaigning for her niece. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Brendan Wales of the Kent Police Department at 253-856-5800. Quoting case number 09003-906. 29-year-old Stanley Shane Bassett of Franklin, New Hampshire, had been working hard to rebuild his health food store business. On top of the pressures of owning a business, Stanley was also a single father to his 9-month-old son, Aaron. In the mid-1970s, Stanley met Debbie, and the two became wed soon after. By 1977, the couple had given birth to 2 children, with Aaron being welcomed into the world on July 27, 1976. Unfortunately, the relationship wasn't meant to last, and the two divorced. It's believed Debbie and their oldest child returned to Pennacook, New Hampshire, leaving Stanley with Aaron. Stanley learned how to care for Aaron exceedingly fast. He spent several months at his sister's home where he remained under her guidance. Finally, in early 1977, the father and son duo moved into a home on Salisbury Road to begin their new lives together. By all accounts, Stanley was a good father who loved Aaron. On April 3, 1977, people passing the Massachusetts State House heard a bizarre sound. As they grew closer, they found 9-month-old Aaron in a cardboard box on the stairs of the building, crying and wailing for attention. The sight immediately disturbed neighbors, and the Franklin Police Department were called to the scene. A complete home search was conducted, but there was no sign of Stanley. The cardboard box had been used as a makeshift cot, and doctors at nearby Tufts New England Medical Center gave Aaron a clean bill of health. He was unharmed and happy. Upon hearing of Stanley's disappearance, some investigators turned their heads. They knew that name. 2 years before he disappeared, Stanley's shop had been shut down by Pennacook police under suspicion of distributing illegal substances. He later picked up a short sentence and was placed on probation on an unrelated charge. At the time of his disappearance, Stanley was still on probation, and according to his probation officer, he never missed a meeting. When the police dug further into his personal life, they discovered something bizarre. In 1976, shortly after he had been released on parole, Stanley reported seeing a car following him. He also became paranoid and feared for his life. The move to Franklin was a much-needed fresh start for Stanley, but investigators fear someone may have followed him. It's out of character for Stanley to leave Aaron or his dogs. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Franklin Police Department at 603-934-2535, quoting case number 22F330F. 30-year-old Byron Edwards Jr. and his girlfriend Kenesha Bond were ecstatic when they discovered that they were pregnant. The couple had been together for 2 years and were excited to start a family. 30-year-old Byron lived with his grandmother in Knoxville, Tennessee, and was preparing to find a home for his family. Byron had a few medical issues, seizures and ADHD, but he managed his condition with medication. As a young man, Byron hadn't always been on the right side of the law. According to his grandmother, Byron had been involved in a gang and partook in gang activities. As he grew older and learned he was about to become a father, Byron changed his ways and turned a new leaf. He left his old life behind and began attending church with his grandmother. March 19, 2020 would mark the last time Byron spoke to his grandmother. On March 19th, Byron stayed at his girlfriend Kenesha's house in the 2300 block of Riverside Drive, Knoxville. Byron stayed the night and agreed to be at his grandmother's home on the 20th. According to Kenesha, she saw Byron leaving her home at around 6:30 p.m. on March 20th. He had made several calls to friends and family asking for a ride to his grandmother's home, around 10 miles away, but nobody was available. By 6:30 p.m., Byron was growing anxious to get home and told Kenesha he would make the 10-mile trip on foot. According to her, Byron walked out of the back door into the woods and was never seen or heard from again. When Byron failed to return home, his grandmother was immediately suspicious. The two had planned to visit the church on March 21st, 2020, and Byron had not contacted her by phone. Byron was officially reported missing 2 days after he was last seen. His girlfriend Kenesha gave birth to their daughter a month after he disappeared. Weeks before her birth, she was diagnosed with a rare heart condition, and Byron failed to attend these appointments. Extensive searches of the property and woods where he was last seen have been conducted, but there's been no sign of him so far. His family believes someone from his past may have been involved in his disappearance. Anyone with information is asked to contact Charles Hardin of the Knoxville Police Department at 865-215-7000, quoting case number 22010-519. 20-year-old Crystal Ahrensdorf was described as a lively and happy young woman living in Dubuque, Iowa. At 20 years old, Crystal began finding her place in the world and deciding what she wanted her future to look like. By 2001, Crystal had been in a relationship with Tim Gerlieb for several years, and the two shared a home together. The couple were said to be happy, and when they received an offer to watch July 4th fireworks, they didn't want to decline. On the evening of July 3rd, 2001, Crystal and her sister Jennifer visited a friend's home close to the Mississippi River to watch fireworks. The show lasted for a few hours, and people watched and cheered in amazement. Once the fireworks show was over, Crystal called Tim to draw out their plans for the evening. According to Jennifer, Crystal and Tim reportedly got into an argument, which ended with Crystal disconnecting the call. Not wanting to waste a good holiday, Crystal and Jennifer decided to visit the Knickers Saloon in the 2186 block of Central Avenue in downtown Dubuque. Despite being only 20 years old, Crystal was able to buy several drinks for herself and her sister. She began chatting with the barman, Robert Moots, at the Knickers Saloon, and shortly into their conversation, the pair agreed to get a taxi to East Dubuque when his shift ended. Crystal continued to drink and socialize with her sister, and when Robert's shift was over at 2:30 a.m., he came looking for her, but Crystal was nowhere to be found. All her friends had already left the bar, and according to reports, Jennifer, Crystal's sister, had taken her car to prevent her from harming herself and others while driving under the influence. Robert looked around the bar for Crystal, talking to patrons as he went. Nobody had seen Crystal leave, and she left behind her keys and wallet. The afternoon of July 4th was anything but joyous for Jennifer, who had driven her sister's car home earlier that morning. Crystal still hadn't come home to collect her car and wasn't answering her phone. Jennifer knew something was wrong and went to the Dubuque Police Department to report her missing. Unfortunately, the police had a bad attitude towards Crystal's disappearance, telling her family they would need to wait 24 hours to file a report. Crystal's family decided to take the investigation into their own hands and began speaking to patrons at the Knickers Saloon. Finally, on July 5th, the Dubuque Police Department took the report and began their investigation. Tim, Crystal's boyfriend, was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but two more suspects would come into view. Two brothers named David and Stephen Peacock quickly became the focus of the investigation. David and Stephen were at the saloon that night and have been questioned at length about that night. According to Iowa cold cases, the two have been subjected to polygraphs and their cars have been forensically searched. Unfortunately, investigators have not uncovered evidence linking Stephen or David to Crystal's disappearance. Over 500 tips have been called in to the Dubuque Police Department, but they're no closer to finding Crystal. In 2015, Iowa cold cases received a stunning tip. The anonymous tipster claimed that on July 4th, David Peacock wasn't driving his own car, but his sister's. The sister's car has never been forensically searched and may hold the answer to Crystal's whereabouts. The tipster also provided the brothers with new aliases and a possible location of where Crystal is buried. All of this information was passed on to the Dubuque Police Department. The Dubuque PD does not believe Crystal left the bar of her own accord. 12 days after she disappeared, rumors of a body floating in Leisure Lake, Jackson County, Iowa began to swirl. A search of the area showed no signs of a body, though. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Dubuque Police Department at 563-589-4410, quoting case number 01-25185. 31-year-old Luke Benoit and his wife Stephen Sherman of Portsmouth, Rhode Island, had built their dream life together. Together, the two had welcomed 4 children into the world, and Luke looked forward to finishing work every day and running home to see his children. In June of 2022, Luke's behavior and attitude changed. He began carrying stress and anguish around and didn't want to burden his family with his issues. At the end of June, Luke would call his wife for what would be the last time. For over a year, Luke's disappearance has baffled investigators. On June 28, 2022, Luke called his wife Stephanie and made what she has called concerning comments. Stephanie immediately called her husband back and placed him on a 3-way call with his family. His family also observed Luke's behavior and pleaded with him to come home. At around 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, Luke ended the call and has never been seen or heard from again. Earlier that afternoon, Luke was spotted buying cigarettes, water, and ginger ale at the Neon Marketplace. Stephanie immediately called the Portsmouth Police Department to report her husband's behavior. During her earlier calls to Luke, she noticed he became more distressed when the police or 911 were mentioned. According to Newport RI, Luke had minor legal issues in the past and was worried he would get in trouble again. Multiple searches have been conducted, but no sign of Luke has ever been found. The Portsmouth Police Department discovered Luke's final ping at 2 a.m. on June 29th in the vicinity of the Saconnet River Bridge. Luke has not used his phone or credit cards since. Stephanie told the media the first thing she does in the morning is call her husband's phone, desperately hoping that he'll pick up. There's been an outpouring of support for Luke's family, with the GoFundMe raising over $6,000 and other businesses donating food and clothes. Luke's family are very concerned for his well-being. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Portsmouth Police Department at 401-683-0300 or the Rhode Island State Police at 401-444-1100. 67-year-old Frances Collette Apperson was last seen on May 17, 2022 in Banner Elk, North Carolina. Frances is deaf and communicates with friends and family via sign language. She was known to be a happy and outgoing woman who was enjoying the start of her retirement. According to friends and family, Frances enjoyed hiking in the beautiful North Carolina wilderness. On May 17th, Frances left her North Course Drive home and jumped into her black and silver 2013 Hyundai Santa Fe. She made plans to hike Hawksbill Mountain in Charlotte, North Carolina with family members, but unfortunately, Frances never arrived and the hike started without her. For several days after the hike, her family continued to try and contact her, but they were met with radio silence. Finally, on May 21st, Frances Apperson was reported missing to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. The Burke County Sheriff's Office and the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department worked together to search for Frances. The departments were able to track her phone, which led them to NC 105, close to the trail to Linville Falls and Linville Gorge. Frances's family told investigators she was familiar with the area, as she enjoyed hiking but did not know why she would go there. Linville Falls and Gorge are popular hiking areas, but some hikers experience difficulty going off of the main trails. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department commented that Frances's car had been parked in that spot for some time, as it was covered in pollen. Inside the car, they found a small angel figurine. Bizarrely, when Frances's family searched along the Linville Falls Trail, they found an identical angel to that was found in Frances's car. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department utilized drones and search and rescue personnel in this case. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Burke County Sheriff's Office at 828-397-4600, quoting case number 2022-022225. Christina Whitaker disappeared under strange circumstances in 2007. Her case has never been solved. It was August 6, 2007 when Christina was last seen. She had made plans to enjoy the civic holiday with some friends. The group consisted of her cousin, Faith, and two young men, Eddie and Joe. All were members of the Youth for Christ group, and Christina was actually a group leader. It was a group of friends she felt safe around. They had originally planned to go to a youth conference in Montreal, but found it would be too expensive, so they settled on camping. The group headed out to Rainbow Falls Provincial Park, arriving on August 5th. The first 6 hours of the trip were spent setting up camp and relaxing before the group decided to take a nap at about 6:30 p.m. They woke up 4 hours later and stayed up late talking and sitting around a campfire. It was 4 a.m. before they decided to turn in for the night. Just 2.5 hours later, Christina woke again. She woke up Eddie and asked if he would accompany her to the Central Comfort Station at the campsite. She apparently didn't want to make the trip alone. This wouldn't have been too strange if it wasn't for what happened next. Christina suggested they jog back to their campsite and decided to take a different route back to Eddie. Eddie headed towards Highway 17 while Christina jogged through the trails. It was the last time anybody saw Christina. She hadn't arrived back by the time Eddie returned, but he didn't think that was too strange. Even when a few hours passed and the other friends woke up, they didn't worry about Christina. They figured she decided to take some time for herself. It was only when it got to 11 a.m. that the friends began to worry. They searched the surrounding area for any sign of Christina before finally reporting her missing 7.5 hours after she vanished. What followed was one of the largest searches in the area's history. Volunteers and professional search and rescue workers searched Rainbow Falls Provincial Park. A number of items were found, but none could be confirmed as belonging to Christina. Search teams also found no evidence of an animal attack, which would have been possible in this area. The police do not suspect foul play, but the possibility hasn't been ruled out either. there's simply not enough evidence to say what really happened that morning. Christina is described as being 5 foot 2 inches tall and weighing 126 pounds when she vanished. She had wavy black hair and brown eyes. She was 20 years old when she went missing. Anybody with information on this case should contact the Ontario Provincial Police at 1-877-934-6363 or 1705-330-4144. Chadwick Carr disappeared while on the phone with his sister in May of 2021. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. Chad was staying at a halfway house in Clinton, Tennessee at the time of his disappearance. 5 months earlier, he had suffered an overdose and vowed to make a difference in his life. He had signed up for a 90-day recovery program, and by May, it was the tail end of the program. Chad's family still lived in Knox County, but Chad spoke to them as often as he could. He talked to his sister Whitney almost every day and posted on social media daily. He thought of himself as a comedian, according to his sister, and was always trying to make people laugh. May 2nd, 2021 was Chad's last post on social media. The 32-year-old was last seen at his home in Clinton. It was about 9:45 p.m. when he was on the phone with his sister. The conversation started normal, and there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary going on in Chad's life at the time. At one point, he set the phone down so he could light a cigarette, but he wouldn't pick the phone up again. Whitney could hear people talking in the background, but couldn't make out what they were saying. After a few moments, the call disconnected. She tried to call Chad back, but he didn't answer the phone. The next day, Chad didn't show up for a meeting and didn't turn up to work at the construction site where he was employed. This struck his family as very strange. Even with everything that was going on in his life, his family knew him as a hard worker and not someone that would abandon his job. At one point, someone went to check on Chadwick at his home. They found he wasn't there, but he'd left behind almost all his belongings. They found his cell phone, wallet, and one of the flip-flops he'd been wearing when he vanished. Chad was reported as a missing person not long after, but the police found no clues that could point to what happened to him. There have been some unconfirmed sightings of Chad near North Central Street and Marilia Avenue in Knoxville the day after he vanished, but no other leads. Both the police and Chad's family and friends believe the case will only move forward if someone comes forward with information. Chad is described as 5 foot 9 inches tall and weighing 230 pounds. He was last seen wearing black shorts, a black tank top, and tan flip-flops. Anyone with information can contact Anderson County Sheriff's Office at 865-457-2414. A night out on a party bus ended with a creepy disappearance for 23-year-old Bryce Borka. More than 6 months later, the only trace that's been found is a tie that he'd been wearing when he got lost in the woods. Bryce and his friends spent the night of October 29th on a party bus in Eagan, Minnesota. Bryce became heavily intoxicated, and the friends decided to call it a night in the early hours of October 30th. They used the ride-sharing app Lyft to head to the east side of the city. During the drive, Bryce decided to get out of the car while the vehicle was still moving, but his friends managed to keep him under control until they got out at about 2 a.m. They had ridden to Hill Ridge Drive, where one of the friends lived. It was a few miles from Bryce's apartment and would have been a 45-minute walk, but Bryce told friends he was going to walk home. He headed off while the friends went inside. It was a journey Bryce had done many times before. The route was well lit, and even while heavily intoxicated, it shouldn't have been too difficult. But Bryce made a wrong turn early on and ended up walking for 30 minutes in the wrong direction. At 2:34 a.m., one of Bryce's friends received a FaceTime call from him. He was lost in a wooded area and had only 2% battery life on his phone. He told his friend he had no idea where he was or how to get home. Bryce managed to send a pin to his friend before the battery ran out and the call ended. Bryce's friends immediately set out to try to find him. The pin took them to a wooded area between Highway 13 and the Minnesota River. They found no sign of their friend and contacted the police at around 11 a.m. that morning to report him missing. Over the next 2 days, over 250 people took part in searches for Bryce. The terrain was particularly difficult, with some marshy areas and some more rocky areas. Even for searchers walking while sober in broad daylight, it was a difficult task to navigate the area. There were also no lights, even around a railway line that runs through the area. It would have been pitch black when Bryce was walking. Early on in the search, a tie was found which the police believed belonged to Bryce. A Nike shoe was also found, but it didn't match the description of what Bryce was wearing when he vanished. Later searches were also hampered by poor weather, with flooding taking place in the area over the winter. It's possible that what clues might have been there have been washed away. The police were able to uncover CCTV footage from an industrial building not far from where Bryce's phone last pinged. It's not been released to the public, but showed him walking alone. In January, a $30,000 reward for information leading to Bryce was announced, but so far it remains unclaimed. Bryce is described as a white male with blonde hair. He was last seen wearing a white shirt and possibly a cardigan. Anyone with information should contact the Eagan Police Department at 651-675-5827. Aaron Gillern was an American citizen living in Vienna, Austria, when he vanished under suspicious circumstances in 2007. The strange case was made all the more confusing by conflicting statements from the police and those who may have seen Aaron last. Aaron had moved to Austria in the early 2000s, falling in love with the country during a year abroad in 1997. He earned a master's degree in theology while in the US and continued his studies while in Austria. At one point, he considered becoming a Roman Catholic priest and attended seminary school, but decided to serve the church in other ways. He was openly gay and didn't believe it would be right to preach against homosexuality. By 2007, Aaron was in a good place in his life. He'd been working for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization for 4.5 years. He had a large apartment in Vienna, and he was looking forward to his mother coming to live with him for 6 months after she had sold her house in the US. He had also booked tickets for vacations with his boyfriend, but on October 29th, he vanished without a trace. The last confirmed sighting of Aaron was as he left work at about 6 p.m. that evening. His partner had stayed the night before, but Aaron had dropped him off at the train station before work, so there would have been nobody to notice when he didn't come home. His employer noticed when he didn't show up for work the next day, though. It was very unlike Aaron to not show up without letting someone know, and his coworkers were unable to get a hold of him. When he didn't show up the following day, they believed something was wrong. Aaron's partner and neighbor had also realized he was missing at this point and tried to file a missing person report with the police. They were told that the police didn't need to investigate Aaron's disappearance, as he wasn't an Austrian citizen. Aaron's work contacted his mother, Kathy, in the US to let her know that he was missing, and her search for her son began. At first, police claimed that Aaron had spontaneously decided to take his own life. This was despite nobody noticing any signs of depression. They claimed he had contracted HIV and ended his life in the Danube River, but it soon emerged that Aaron had recently tested negative. Police later claimed there were reports of a man matching Aaron's description floating in the Danube River. They told Kathy they had searched the area where he vanished with scuba teams and sniffer dogs, but it would later emerge this hadn't happened at all. According to Kathy, the police were hostile towards her and dismissive of Aaron's case. Aaron had previously complained about the same police after he was taken into custody for forgetting to have his subway card stamped. He had allegedly been physically attacked, and the police had made homophobic remarks. That incident had been 4 years before he vanished. Kathy later learned that Aaron had been to a sauna after he left work the night that he disappeared. There were reports of a fight at the sauna, started by tourists, and Aaron fled the scene wearing only a towel. All of his belongings were left behind. Some reports stated ambulances had been called to the sauna, while others claimed that no fight had taken place. What exactly happened to Aaron and why remains a mystery, and will likely remain that way unless anybody comes forward with information. According to NAMUS, the Austrian Federal Criminal Police Cold Case Unit is the investigating agency and can be contacted at 431-248-36-985-302. Barbara Hollick was a German citizen living in New Mexico when she vanished without a trace in 1995. Since then, there have been no clues or even solid theories about what happened to her. Barbara had immigrated to the US in 1989 and eventually settled in New Mexico. She worked at a gallery where she made jewelry and painted pottery, as well as minding the gallery itself. She was described as reliable, so when she didn't show up for work, her employer was concerned. Sonny Spruce, the owner of the gallery, went to Barbara's apartment the first day she didn't show up for work. That was June 26, 1995. He found the door to her duplex apartment unlocked. The apartment itself was neat and tidy, which was how Barbara liked it. There was no sign of the missing woman, though. The next day, Barbara still hadn't shown up for work. At this point, she was reported missing. It was determined that the last time anybody had seen Barbara was June 23rd, the Friday before she was reported missing. She had spent the evening at a bar with friends near the duplex where she lived. She had been drinking but wasn't intoxicated, according to the people who were with her. She left the bar between 10 and 11 p.m. to make the short walk home. It seemed like she had made it home. All of her belongings were found at her apartment, including her car and car keys. Her ID and clothing that she'd been wearing the night she was last seen were also found. Her luggage was stored under her bed, and a roll of banknotes was found on the bedside table. There was no indication she had planned to disappear. Not only was it out of character for Barbara to simply vanish without telling anyone, but she also had a friend visiting from Germany who was due to arrive shortly after she disappeared. She had even bought tickets to go rafting with her friend when he arrived. There was no sign of foul play at the apartment, though, and police found no clues that could give them any kind of theory. A few days later, one clue emerged. A maid had been cleaning out the upstairs apartment after some short-term renters had left. She found a pair of shoes on the sofa, which were confirmed to belong to Barbara. The phone cord in the apartment had been cut, and some bed sheets were missing. The 4 businessmen who had been staying in the apartment were eventually tracked down but claimed to have not interacted with Barbara during their stay. Unfortunately, the maid cleaned the apartment before the police could investigate, potentially wiping away any clues. Over the years, there have been a number of tips in this strange case, but none have led police to Barbara or her body. If alive, Barbara would be 61 years old today. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5 feet tall and weighed 120 pounds. She had long black hair and brown eyes. Anyone with information can contact the Taos Police Department at 575-758-4656. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.